Good day, attendees to the 14th De La Salle University Arts Congress. My name is Charles Dominic Sanchez of the University of San Carlos, and I'd like to welcome you all to my presentation entitled Kinsa Diay. In English, Who Else But Us? Neoliberalism and Anti-Politics at Work in 3 Cebuano songs released during community quarantine. So I begin my paper by giving a brief overview of how neoliberalism got entrenched, not just as a series of economic policies, but also as a political thought, both within the context of a global scale and also locally in the Philippine setting. So of course I mentioned the administrations of UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and US President Ronald Reagan, which scholars point to as the first wave of neoliberal economics. These administrations were of course concurrent with the opening of China's economy under Deng Xiaoping throughout the 80s, and also precipitated the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Now, in the Philippines, the fall of the Marcos dictatorship, which had already begun implementing neoliberal forms slowly, essentially paved the way for such programs and policies to see widespread implementation under the Aquino administration. Now, a good part of why they were able to pull this off, according to Walden Bello, was because the Aquino administration was able to pin economic woes on the interventionist state personified by the Marcos regime. Now, at the individual level, Arneson Andre Ortega notes how a recent cultural shift, which valorizes entrepreneurialism and competitiveness, which is consequently contingent on the othering of surplus populations, has manifested in the Philippine milieu. So pronouncements that state to the effect the importance of working hard, pulling oneself up by one's own bootstraps, and with regard to the COVID-19 situation, staying home without taking into consideration multiple variables and the difficult realities of the aforementioned surplus populations are proof of neoliberal thinking at work. Next, I give a quick discussion on anti-politics, which is essentially a hyper-individualist ideology. Posits that the individual is exempt from or not affected by social realities, and therefore participation in political processes such as protests or elections is immaterial. Now, what preoccupies the mind of an individual operating under anti-politics are capitalist underpinned perceptions of success, and that these are achieved by sheer grit and hard work. Now, by playing up the self in relation to one's society, private corporations and neoliberal state governments have hindered many from looking past their individual privileges or dissuaded mass organizations in general. And they have effectively atomized society, to use Noam Chomsky's words, while these powerful sectors further consolidate their dominance. Now, statements such as "I don't want to get too political" or "I won't vote because all politicians are the same anyway," which I'm sure we've all uttered or have heard someone else state, are manifestations or examples of anti-politics at work. In the second part of my paper, I give a quick discussion on the COVID-19 pandemic situation and how it played out in Cebu. As many of us know, Cebu was identified as the Philippines' second major battleground in the fight against COVID-19 on account of the skyrocketing cases from May to July 2020. This prompted a reverting of Cebu status from GCQ to the more stringent MECQ, as well as the deployment of police and military personnel from various provinces to strictly enforce regulations. Now, one of the more memorable quotes stated around this time came from Rodrigo Duterte, who attributed the description "gahig ulo" or stubborn to Cebuanos for allegedly not following quarantine protocols. Perhaps one of the more distinctly Cebuano means by which officials and organizations sought to remind the public of the severity of the virus and the importance of adhering to regulations was the uploading onto the internet of music videos with pandemic-inspired lyrics. As the birthplace of the Vispop phenomenon and the home of various musical artists, Cebu already had the infrastructure and the personnel in place to convey COVID-related information by way of music. Between May and August 2020, I came across on social media 3 music videos tailored for this purpose: Why Blima, ECQ version by the Wongoys, a lyrically modified version of their 2018 song of the same name, Dungan or Together, sung by various artists and produced by the Ramon Aboitiz Foundation in collaboration with independent record label Kadasig, and Kinsa Diay, performed also by various artists and released by the Cebu Citizens Initiative. So I move on to a quick referencing to scholars who've articulated that relationship music tends to have with politics. So according to Michael Ryan and Brett Ingram, music, as with all other forms of art, has a mutually determined and determining relationship with the political sphere. In other words, both music and politics greatly influence each other, however far removed they may seem. And according to Robert Witkin, if not examined critically, music can have that reactionary purpose of concealing from members of society the true facts of their social condition. Similarly, Resil Mojares points out that music and politics cannot be dissociated. And he also poses some interesting questions about this relationship that had some bearing on my analysis and that I hope I answered in some capacity. So in my analysis, these were some of the characteristics I was able to extract from the three songs under study. Most obvious is the information dissemination and dispelling of disinformation aspect, mainly with regard to both Waiblima or S1 from here on, and Dungan S2, which were both released in May 2020, relatively early in the quarantine period. There is also the notable absence of calls for mass testing and questioning of the myriad controversial ways pandemic protocols were enforced. So personally, I took this as an avoidance by the artists or the composers of highly charged political issues. Unfortunately, and on the other hand, there is the extolling of obedience and discipline, or in other words, an operating within government narrative of ascribing reclamador to critics and pasaway to supposed violators. There's also the passing of blame or responsibility for institutional failures onto individual citizens, which is very characteristic of a government in a neoliberal state, and also the calls for unity and solidarity in the service of the economy, most especially pronounced in the case of Kinsa Pamandiay or S3. Here are some lines that bring out the dissemination and dispelling aspects of both S1 and S2. So there are lines in both songs that address misconceptions about the demographics the virus purportedly only affects the wealthy and the old. And also there is dispelling with regard to rumored treatments such as the ingesting of alcohol, the taking of vitamins, exposing oneself to sunlight, and gargling salt. So feel free to pause the frame if you want to take a closer look at the lines that I'm citing. There is also the expected reminder of precautions in both songs. So S1, for example, starts with emphasizing the strictness of quarantine, the importance of staying home, as well as reminding the listeners via backing vocals of the community quarantine status of Cebu at the time of the song's release. In S2, there is a similar reminding rhetoric with regard to social distancing, as well as staying home, avoiding public gatherings, and other risky scenarios. S2 also has lines relating to frequent hand washing and refraining from touching one's face. Now, with regard to obedience and discipline in the chorus of S1, the lyrics there mention how there is no need to worry if we just follow the rules and just stay home. The same value is stressed even more, albeit with fewer lines in S2, where the phrase, "obey the mandate of those who govern," is repeated twice within the song. The succeeding lines then convey a similar message. And also in another line in S2, the solution to this crisis lies in the widespread practicing by the public of discipline. And lastly, for unity and solidarity for the economy, by S3's release in August, the economy was beginning to strain, local government resources were running low, and hence there is the song's emphasis on progress and the calling on or giauhag of citizens to reclaim lost livelihoods. Now, this is despite little assurance from the government that they had managed to keep the pandemic under control, and this unfortunately puts citizens in a position where they had to make that choice between their own and their family's health and safety and their livelihoods, which undergird the economy. So in my conclusion, I cite political scientist Vivek Chiber, who emphasizes looking into capital's role in examining and explaining various phenomena in an age where capitalist tendencies have become universalized. So perhaps a future study could look into the funding or patronage of these musical productions. But in the meantime, the preliminaries I've been able to lay out here appear far from encouraging. as they suggest how neoliberal philosophy and anti-politics and more broadly right-wing tendencies have prevailed in the Cebuano milieu, going unquestioned even in a realm where critical thought and subversion ought to have the greatest potential: the arts. In conclusion, I end with the statement: ideology is most effective when it is invisible. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone.